Well, this is something I probably should have done a video on a million years ago. It's certainly not relevant to anything current, but I think it's a very consistent little microcosm of the war against conservative and leftist morality as a whole, between objective morality and moral relativism. Now, while I don't necessarily believe in objective morality because I believe it's a malformed concept, moral relativism is surely nothing but pure evil, illogical garbage. Now, that's not a contradiction because you see, I as a pragmatist and a pessimist, view morality as conditional. However, the moral relativist pretends these conditions can't be identified and then used to construct something that quite rather resembles objective morality in practice, that you can have and develop due to a complete understanding of the consequences of your actions and the consequences of your personal morality. Develop a rigid structure that is not malleable in the way a moral relativist thinks all morality is. And there's no better example of this than Alan Moore's character, Rorschach from Watchmen, or Who Watches the Watchmen. Now, the fascinating thing about more modern nerds and comic fans' understanding of these characters, the juxtaposition between Ozymandias and Rorschach, is largely based on the movie. In the movie's portrayal of these characters is almost antithetical, almost completely reversed to Alan Moore's portrayal of these two characters in the graphic novel. And the fact that so few people understand or can see this is rather fascinating. Now, your leftist interpretation, reeing and screeing and making terrible HBO TV series that completely destroy the lore of this canon, will have you believe that Rorschach is a white supremacist, Nazi fascist hero, and that he should be maligned, and that there's something seriously wrong with people who think he's cool or hero or something to model your morality after. Now, with the exception of that last sentence, this is true. Alan Moore intended Rorschach to be viewed as reprehensible and disgusting and disturbing to the viewer. Now, in classic form of the cringe socialist, they can't really portray problems with their enemies with logic or personality or character depth. It's almost always incredibly superficial. Rorschach is shown as like a homeless, dirty hobo, physically repulsive, verbally crass and rude, and extremely bigoted, hyper-violent, and snap to judgment. And he thinks all of this is bad and ugly. And then Rorschach goes around doing righteous good things like murdering pedophiles and beating rapists and abusers half to death, and just being a complete monstrous terror a la Batman to the sickest and most depraved criminals in the city. And when you're looking at this from just a common sense point of view, let alone a pragmatist philosophy point of view, it is difficult to see Rorschach as evil when all he does is good. And yeah, he may swear and he may be a racist and blah, 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 blah. And he may wax on constantly about politics, and he considers liberals to be a cancer because they allow the kind of society that Rorschach has to face. And again, people are like, well, yeah, the sort of leftist world that Moore has set up has produced a corrupt and disgusting society full of predators. And Rorschach is a product of this society. And yet we're still supposed to, in Moore's eyes, view Rorschach as reprehensible. Now, Moore, perhaps thinking himself smarter than his stupid commie ass really is going to defeat this misconception of the viewer by contrasting Rorschach with Ozymandias, who, ironically, looks a lot more like the fascist Ubermensch. Blonde, beautiful, tall, strong, hyper-intelligent, industrious. But Ozymandias is actually portraying what Moore thinks righteousness is. And Moore is concerned with the best end by any means necessary. Perhaps you've heard this phrase, by any means necessary, used by a lot of socialists and commies and leftists in the past several years. This is no accident. This is a product of their ideology. And how does Ozymandias go about saving the world and preventing a world-ending thermonuclear war? How does he do this? By killing millions upon hundreds of millions of people on purpose, so that billions might live. Which Rorschach finds absolutely unconscionable and horrible. And since he's powerless to stop it, and powerless to convince his friends to put an end to it, since they had failed to stop Ozymandias' plan, and also been unable to convince his friends to punish Ozymandias for his crimes, basically commits suicide by confronting Dr. Manhattan. And that's the tragedy of Rorschach. Now, people who watched the movie saw this as what it was, a horrible tragedy. Not just a tragedy of the death of Rorschach, and not just the tragedy of failing to prevent Ozymandias' evil plans, but the tragedy that the uncompromising righteousness of Rorschach didn't translate to his friends or his enemies, and that it wasn't just the death of the character, but the death of the concept of uncompromising morality. Now, I may have said that my morality is conditional, but like I said, it's conditional on the consequences of that morality. And to me, looking at the consequences of Ozymandias' morality is the death of hundreds of millions of people by deliberate murder. Now, I'm sorry if I'm a white nationalist, white supremacist Nazi for finding Ozymandias to being the absolute epitome of evil. This idea of butchery and falsity and murder and betrayal and conspiracy and genocide in the service of this greater good, if I find that unconscionable, so utterly reprehensible that I would give my own life to stop it, and that I would spite it in the face of death, if that makes me a monster, well, your monsters look a hell of a lot more palatable than your heroes, in my opinion. So, confronted with this, you'll very often, anytime when you see a video about the Watchmen, it always inevitably gets boiled down into this argument where everyone says Rorschach is awesome. Rorschach is the epitome of the white Western hero. That whether he triumphs or faces tragedy, his trueness to morality and righteousness and good, and his heroism, which is self-sacrifice in the face of evil, is what heroism is. Putting yourself in danger, potentially sacrificing or actually sacrificing yourself to prevent evil or to save people from it. It's very natural. It's goddamn downright axiomatic that a sane and rational human being would find Rorschach to be the good guy. So, what kind of derangement, what kind of polluted brain state do you need to be in to view Ozymandias as good? Is it really down to superficial qualities that Ozymandias, while being an absolute monster, is educated and clean and industrious, and his capitalistic, oddly enough for a communist hero, it is another reason why Moore is a complete fucking hack, because you're going like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Are you sure Ozymandias is a socialist hero? Yes, the fact that there's some dissonance there is not due to my interpretation being wrong. It's due to Moore being a fucking retard. Okay? Uh, this guy looks clean and honorable and has the respect of a populace who doesn't know who he really is. And we're supposed to view this superficial, beautiful hero as a hero, even though he's a monster. And then we look at a character who's completely, rigidly righteous, whose entire lifestyle is continuous sacrifice in the face of evil. Just because he's ugly and dirty and uneducated, and no one loves him, and no one likes him, and he's even detached from his allies, that we're supposed to view him as repulsive when the consequences of his actions and the actual logic of his philosophy makes perfect fucking sense, and we're supposed to be repulsed by his superficial appearance. The vapidity, the vacuousness, the emptiness, and again, the superficiality of the leftist is absolutely batshit insane. There is no reality, there's no righteousness, there's nothing correct about it. Rorschach, and you'll see all these Redditors in any conversation that you ever see about this character. Oh, you can't like Rorschach because he's a racist. You can't like Rorschach because he's a fascist. Why do you think I've been going over this constantly? That implies that Rorschach just doesn't like people because of superficial things about them. Because keep in mind, the argument that racism is evil hinges on the lie and fallacy that racism is based on a superficial excuse for hatred. That is not true. Bigotry towards anything is based on the perceived consequences of that thing. I'm sorry, but if Rorschach enters Baltimore and sees that all the drug pushers and rapists and monsters and criminals and thieves and thugs and murderers of this area that is like overwhelmingly like 80+% black people, and then develops a hatred towards these black people that may even color his perception of black people in general. And keep in mind, Baltimore is just one excuse of many cities across the world that have this kind of problem. Is he hating these people for their skin color or the way they are born, or is he hating these people for the way they act and behave and the consequences of their actions and their morality on society? So if he goes, all of blank group are evil because all he sees them doing is preying upon innocent people, exactly where is the fault in the logic there? Now, for a political ideology that seems very bent on trying to turn pedophilia into a normalized mainstream sexual orientation, I imagine that they would be quite terrified and offended by a character whose introduction is in butchering a man who is a serial rapist and murderer of underage girl children. Now, does he hate that guy for some sort of sexual urge he can't control, or is he destroying this evil monster for what this evil monster has done and will continue to do until somebody puts a stop to it? Versus Ozymandias is concerned with the threat of things, of the potential problems that the world faces. And in fact, in order to justify Ozymandias' actions, Moore had to create, towards the end of the Cold War, when America was undoubtedly winning and the threat of nuclear conflagration was diminishing to the point of vanishing in the late 80s, Moore makes this Watchmen comic. And he has to present a world where Nixon has been president forever, and Nixon, a rather shitty president, who did really continue to perpetuate the Holocaust of the Vietnam War on the world and on America as well as Vietnam, he was a real bastard. But not even Moore could bring himself to put somebody like Reagan, let alone any conservative of his time, in that position. He had to reach back into some slug like Nixon. And if only he'd waited a little bit longer, he could have had Herbert Walker Bush as an example of an absolute fucking monstrous bastard Republican to portray as a threat to the survival of the human race. If only. If only he'd waited a little longer, right? Anyway, what you're getting at the end of this, at the end of the day, is a completely deformed mentality. The Alan Moore mentality is disturbing and the product of a very unsane mind, an unsound mind, in my opinion. In that Snyder, who I think is one of the worst filmmakers in the world today, a man so fucking bad at his job as to make Michael Bay blush, somehow created what's, in my opinion, a borderline, not quite there, but a borderline masterpiece that is The Watchmen, that basically flipped the entire ideology of the comic book on its head. That despite the comedian being a rapist and a murderer, presented him as a tragic case of a character whose flaw was uncompromising patriotism and duty to what he was told to do, and what the comedian was told to do by the American government that Snyder doesn't fail to portray as stupid and reprehensible in the movie, because that's something that should be a through line through both interpretations, that the government in this case was a monster. That is absolutely true. And I believe that there really hasn't been a righteous government in America in an extremely long time, Republican or Democrat. And in fact, I believe the continuing idea that those are the only two choices we have is wrong. However, I don't necessarily believe that adding more parties would solve this problem. In fact, I am absolutely dead certain it'd make it worse, but that's a topic for another video. However, changing the moral and logical framework of the existing parties, which is something that continuously happens regardless, just usually not for the better, is the answer to that question. And ultimately, the mentality of the government in Watchmen is no different than the mentality of Ozymandias. The atrocities that characters like Dr. Manhattan and comedian perpetrated in the name of service to their country is the same sort of atrocities in order to produce the greater good mentality that Ozymandias demonstrates at the end of the movie. And yet we're supposed to believe that Ozymandias is the answer to the problem of the world of the Watchmen, but also the antidote to the supposedly evil and misguided philosophy of Rorschach, when there is absolutely no difference in the greater scope of things between Nixon and Ozymandias in that universe. It's absurd to try to say that Ozymandias is better just by committing mass atrocities and murders and holocausts at a grander scale than Nixon or whoever the fuck else, or Rorschach for that matter, could hope to do. And Rorschach, in his own way, is also interesting in so much that I don't think that what he's doing is in service to the people that he's saving. That's another fascinating thing about Rorschach, and I believe that's the thing that Alan Moore meant to be most repulsive about him, and that is the way that Rorschach most resembles, perhaps, the modern white supremacist 4chan blah 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 blah, which is to say that it's not so much that Rorschach cares about the rest of people, it's that he is disgusted by and cannot abide the filth and scum that he is confronted with. And Rorschach doesn't believe himself to be any kind of paragon of anything. or to be an example that we should follow, ironically enough. Rorschach just cannot stand, he cannot abide, and he cannot allow the evil he sees. He's disgusted by it. Now, of course, the absolute core of everything leftist you've ever seen, be it from philosophy to entertainment to writing to character arcs to psychology, even to medicine, the leftist mentality, and I've seen it myself in the realm of psychotherapy, and I've in psychology and psychiatry, is the idea that disgust is an unacceptable emotion. However, it's also the same emotion that leftists are absolutely saturated by. They're ruled by it. They're addicted to it. Disgust is literally all the leftist is and does. They set up all these things that they can't abide by, these absolutely illogical problems, these absolutely malformed concepts about how to fix those problems, which are not problems. And then all they do is indulge in disgust. They're not willing to discuss any kind of flaws, or indeed definitely not willing to discuss any qualities that Rorschach has. It's simply he's a fascist, therefore we cannot be discussing Rorschach in positive terms, no matter what he is or what he, more importantly, does. We're not allowed to discuss the consequences of Rorschach's actions or the consequences of his philosophy. He's a racist, therefore he's wrong about everything, therefore you can't like him. Which is stupid. That is absolutely retarded. Do you understand? Now, I don't necessarily think Rorschach is the kind of hero that I would like to be. He's not exactly the kind of person I would like to emulate. However, is there a part of me I can see in this character? Is there some of me in Rorschach? Absolutely. I do not believe that disgust is bad. I do not believe that disgust is an improper or unacceptable human emotion. I don't believe that disgust is not allowed to be a justification for how we feel and what we do. That is absolutely not true. There are things that are unacceptable and completely reprehensible and should be destroyed, often with extreme prejudice. And not just prejudice of action, but prejudice of conception and thought. Do you understand? And this is one of the ways that it has been, despite every single financial and organizational, governmental, and conspiratorial advantage that leftism has, the fact that it is a conspiracy against Western society and indeed objective morality, or at least pragmatic morality, that it is an entire philosophy that is backed by every single kind of indoctrination center and financial profiteer in the universe, in the West, that we're told all day that Rorschach is bad and you can't beat Rorschach. There's more Rorschachs every day. And the more that people are faced with this absolutely nakedly evil society, and that the power structure of the Western world right now is phenomenally, disgustingly evil, and not just insidious, but insipid and stupid and incomprehensible as it is reprehensible, that more and more people aren't looking to take the smart approach to resisting. More people aren't even interested in my idea of pragmatic addressing of these issues, be they bigotry or charity. Either or. They're just going, my enemies are child molesters and murderers and corporate thieves in soulless suits and conniving, selfish, greedy psychopaths. And when a person sees their enemy that way, and when their enemy very much is that way, they see no problem with stooping to the level of a Rorschach to resist something that is so corrupt and so diseased. They don't feel like they have to be charitable or have to be fair because their enemies are so unacceptable, so unconscionable that resisting them by any means necessary is acceptable. And what's in the world's best interest is to never let the balance of power tip in such a way that somebody's saying the words by any means necessary. But when you have your basic blue dog Democrat, absolutely benign liberal named Donald J. Trump, and the reason why he's a racist, evil, Nazi, fascist, white supremacist is because he doesn't believe people should be allowed to come in from poorer countries and depress the wages and reduce the living conditions and the quality of life of the people of our country. And they don't even go through any kind of immigration process. They're just allowed to come in, and then the government takes the tax dollars of the American people to pay for babysitting illegal aliens. If he comes in and says this is unacceptable and this should stop, and all of a sudden he's a monster to the left, you're going to get a bunch of people on the right wing saying, you're fucking stupid. You're an insane liar. Why are you lying and fighting and thrashing and cheating and conniving with libel and slander and deceit and illegal spying and criminal activity in order to resist a guy who just says, oh, hey, the current situation is unacceptable and should be changed, and not changed in a violent way, that just the law as it exists on the books of our fucking legislature should be enforced as it is written and not ignored in favor of harming the American people. You see how over time, and in fact over a very short amount of time, just 5 years, we get to a bunch of people saying, yes, I am a white supremacist. Yes, I am a national socialist. The situation of liberal democracy looks like pure fucking evil to me. And if you think this is good, I think you're a fucking monster. And I am not ashamed of telling you that. And I am not ashamed of whatever label you put on me when I resist you. I am not ashamed of what I am. But I am definitely disgusted by you. That's what being Rorschach is. Thanks for watching.